Yes.
I am, thank you, Chair. Look, there are a wide range of matters to canvass in this paper and to discuss with councillors, but before we do so, can I suggest that we address the issue that was discussed at the meeting on the 9th of November around providing direction to the Board of HBRC by way of a resolution of council as the shareholder to modify the statement of intent to provide some further direction with respect to any ongoing work or expenditure by HBRC in relation to the RWSS. At that discussion on the 9th, councillors were keen to seek legal advice on the land swap issues to understand the nature of that legal contest prior to consulting the Board of HBRC on any further modification of the Statement of Intent. We have Lara Blomfield from Sainsbury Logan with us, and Lara, if I could just ask you to come up to the front. Last night I circulated to all councillors a copy of Mrs Blomfield's legal advice on the land swap, and she is now available to take questions on that advice. So, Chair, with your indulgence, I'd like to address this matter first of all before we get into the detail of the review work programme. So, Lara, I don't know whether you want to make any opening remarks or take it as read. Councillors did only receive that advice last night, and simply that's just been the time frame we've been working between your meeting on the 9th and being able to commission and prepare that advice and provide it to you on this tight time frame. So over to you, Lara.
If it would be helpful, given the relatively short time frame that you've had to consider this, I can just summarise the key points in the advice that I gave. I was asked to address three issues, the first of which was whether I thought it likely that the Supreme Court would grant leave to the Minister of Conservation and HBRC to appeal to that court, and my view is that is likely, and it is likely that a decision will be made on the papers, so without hearing from the parties. The next question that I was asked to address was whether I thought there was merit in the appeals that had been lodged, and that required me to read the High Court's decision, the Court of Appeal's decision, the submissions that have been lodged with the Supreme Court. I did all of that, and in my view, the appeals do have merit. There is certainly an arguable case for HBRC and the Minister of Conservation that the majority of the Court of Appeal got it wrong. They have applied a very narrow reading to a particular provision of the Conservation Act, which has affected its decision-making on that. You may have seen, if you've had a chance to read the advice, in total so far we've had 4 judges look at this question. 2 judges in the majority of the Court of Appeal found against HBRC and the Minister, and 2 judges found for them. So in terms of the members of the court who've considered this issue, it's finely balanced. I was asked whether HBRC's current application to become a requiring authority meant that it could purchase land or acquire land under the Public Works Act, because my understanding is that that process is underway and that process is running in parallel with the appeals to the Supreme Court. The answer to that is yes, it can. So if requiring authority status is granted to HBRC for the purposes of the dam footprint and its environs, then it can use that route to acquire the land, including conservation land. The Supreme Court's decision should not have a bearing on that process legally, but it may affect what the Minister considers when she makes her decision, because under the Public Works Act and the Resource Management Act combined, the Minister of Lands must agree to the land being acquired, and so must the Minister of Conservation. So there's a bit of a process to be followed under the Public Works Act before that can occur. So that is my summary, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lara. Questions? Just in regard to the acquisition of the land, what appeals is that open to? if they went down the Public Works Act. There must be appeal provision in that.
It's the same process. So it would be a judicial review application of the decision-making process. So exactly the same processes we're involved in these proceedings.
It's supplementary, Chair, and I'm not asking you to speculate, but you would have to think that would be highly likely, wouldn't you? So I am asking to speculate.
Well, acknowledging that it is speculation, I think it would be fair to say that given the degree of opposition from the Forest and Bird Society so far, that they will use any means necessary and available to them.
Peter, then Tom.
Thanks, Lara. Just a question in regard to the involvement of your company with HBRC and with the appeal, and I think it needs to be tabled at this meeting. I saw a document that was filed in court by representing HBRC, which had, if not your name, certainly your firm's name on it. And given that you've been invited here to give us independent and objective view on the prospects of this case being won, I think you probably need to clarify your position in relation to those matters.
Thank you for that opportunity. My name is on the papers that have been filed in the High Court, the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. So myself and my firm are what is known as instructing solicitors. Because of the kind of proceedings that are involved here, because they are court proceedings, barristers cannot take instructions from clients directly, which means that they must have an instructing solicitor or an instructing law firm. Throughout these proceedings, HBRC has been very capably assisted by barristers, but they need the name of an instructing solicitor on the court papers. So that is why my name appears on the papers and why my firm's name appears on the papers. I have had no direct involvement in the decision-making or the strategising around these appeals. I have seen copies of all correspondence that involves the various courts, but that is all I have seen. So all I can tell you is that you have to trust me on this, and Mr. Newman may be able to help with his previous involvement with HBRC. As far as I'm aware, the barristers have been dealing directly with HBRC and taking instructions, and they have not required my involvement or assistance in any regard there.
So just to supplement, so you can give us an assurance that you haven't been involved in briefing anybody that's represented HBRC in these series of court cases to date?
On these proceedings, absolutely not.
I accept that, but it seems to me that this is a rather narrow interpretation of whether there might be a conflict. In what capacity were you at the Board of Inquiry when I testified before the Board of Inquiry on the issues surrounding this dam?
I was instructed by Hawke's Bay Regional Council at that inquiry to assist with the Tuki plan change, and that was the focus of my work there. So I appeared with Trevor Robinson, who was a barrister who acted in respect of both projects, both the plan change and also the scheme.
So you've had a pretty substantial involvement
I've had
historically in this process.
I've had a substantial involvement historically in the plan change. There are a great many details to do with the scheme that I know very little about except what I read in the paper, because I was not involved in either briefing the evidence for that or in the running of the case for that aspect of the Tuki scheme, if you can call it that.
May I continue? Setting aside the analysis of whether you think the court will accept the appeal, let's set that aside. Should you not have given us any analysis of then what, in the sense of this seems to be basically a regurgitation of HBRC's position on the matter and Doc's position on the matter, but there's no analysis here of what might have caused two judges to side with the other side on this issue. So I guess all I can conclude from reading this is that at the end of the day, it's really a toss-up. You say there are two judges who went one way, two judges who went another way. Is that it? Is it a toss-up?
All I can say is that it's finely balanced. I honestly can't tell you which way the Supreme Court is going to go. It is, if I had to hazard a guess, probably tossing a coin is as good a way as any to determine which way those 5 judges might make their decision when the time comes. Just to respond to your initial comment, though, Councillor Belford, in terms of where the Forest and Bird Society sit, their argument, which was accepted by the Court of Appeal, is that when the Director General of Conservation made his decision whether or not to revoke the conservation park status of the land, he should not have been considering at the same time the exchange proposal. And so that court accepted that you can only look at the intrinsic values of the particular land, that is the 22 hectares of land. So that is, it's boiling it down, but that is the argument that the Society ran and were successful in running in the Court of Appeal. And that is exactly the same argument that they will be running before the Supreme Court.
Any other questions for Lara? Then thank you very much. I think we accept that it is a fine line for your firm, but we accept your explanation. James.
Thank you, Chair. So could I perhaps return to the resolution on the 9th of November with respect to consulting the board of HBRC on a potential resolution to modify the statement of intent, and just clarify from council whether or not there's any further action required by staff in relation to that resolution, or whether or not that matter is now sufficiently addressed by way of the legal advice that you have just received.
So, just in response to that, James, I'm proposing some additional resolutions to this paper, which will involve moratoriums on other aspects of HBRC expenditure, etc., and those will be subject to consultation with HBRC. So the opportunity to amend their statement of intent, if that's going to be necessary, can be carried out as part of it.
Through you, Chair. Look, I note that there is a council meeting on the 14th of December, and so if at the conclusion of this item there is a resolution to consult HBRC further, then I'm sure that could be accommodated between now and the 14th, and then that consultation could effectively be concluded by the 14th and a final determination by council on those matters reached. So, Chair, and if I could just apologise that there wasn't a hard copy of that legal advice available to you this morning. That is now just being circulated. That was the electronic copy that came through last night. So, returning to the substantive...
Mr Chairman, just before we proceed, could Councillor Bevan foreshadow these motions he intends to...
Just in response to that, yes, Councillor Dick, I've actually forwarded them to Leanne so that they can be put up on the board for everybody to look at. I think that, I mean...
Do you want to look at them now, before you go into this paper?
Well, I'd like to know what surprises we're going to get at the end. I would like to have a look.
So maybe, Leanne, if you could arrange to get them printed while we're having the discussion on James's substantive paper, and then councillors can have the opportunity to have a look at them while that's going on.
We'll put them up there, and then you can have a look. But we'll go through. James, there's a lot of interest in this paper. We're going to take point by point. Should we just go through point by point and get people's comments and questions point by point?
Chair, I was going to suggest that we break the issues down into essentially 4 parts. The first of which is a why question. why are we undertaking this review, and essentially what are we seeking to achieve? So some of the submissions we've received have asked for clarity about what is the purpose of this process, and I have within the paper in paragraphs 5, 6 and 7 articulated a suggestion there. The next question is the what. So what is the actual activities that will be undertaken, and the questions that Council would like answered through the review. The third question is a who, which advisors, both independent of Council and internal to Council, and this question of a reference group. And then the fourth and final question is a when question, and that's timing for report back. So perhaps if we just started with that question, first of all, of the why and the purpose of this. I have suggested in the paper that the purpose of the review is not to provide a definitive recommendation to Council one way or other. In other words, I'm not anticipating producing a report at the end of March, end of April that would say to Council, it is staff recommendation that you proceed with the scheme, or you shelve the scheme, or you abandon the scheme, but rather the purpose of the review is to bring back to the Council table an overall picture of the cost and benefits, the risks and opportunities, to enable both a further dialogue with the community around those cost, benefits, risks and opportunities, and for Council to then reflect on all of that and to then make its determination about what is the path forward.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if I could ask an interim question on
that particular
point. James, I wonder whether you could help me in that scope. Are you anticipating including, notwithstanding your response around it as to a recommendation, the steps and costs of exit from the scheme?
Absolutely, Councillor. So within the proposed work programme, right at the front end, particularly items 2 and 3 for the review, so those process steps and very much all the costs and liabilities that would arise around that. So it very much would be at the front end of the report that would come back.
Through you, Chair. James, I think it's implicit in the way you've laid this out, but just for total clarity here, it seems to me the work you've described would assist us not simply in yes or no about the scheme, but it could have two other outcomes. One is that it might suggest alternatives, and that's not really made very clear here, that there could be other ways of approaching this that might include storage, for that matter, that we could come at this so that would you expect that alternatives could surface and be supported by some of this work, is one question. And the other would be somewhat related to Councillor Curtin's. If we were to pursue a path of abandoning the project, there seems to be some work contemplated here, particularly in the sections, well, they're described in the sections that are listed as environment 12 and following, that would suggest, all right, well, here are practices or an approach to farming systems or what have you in Central Hawke's Bay that might accommodate a decision not to provide irrigation water. I mean, it would seem like if those questions were fully examined, that might be one of the outcomes that we'd reach, that in fact there are practices, there is headroom, there are, opportunities to both better use water and do so environmentally benignly, and that this work would also establish whether that's the case or not, whether those kinds of options exist. So when I first read this, I was reading it as, well, really, the staff isn't going to take a position. I recognize that, but it was sort of like either or was the only possible set of outcomes here, yes or no. And it does seem to me that there are other possibilities there, and I would hope that this work would help identify those as well. Is that how you see this?
Through you, Chair. The question of alternatives, first of all, there are 3 dimensions of that are proposed in the current work scope. The first of which is looking at the possibility of moving the dam itself downstream of its current consented position with respect to the land swap issue. The second is looking at on-farm storage, so it is proposed that we look at the cost and benefits of on-farm water storage. And the third is the number 11 item, which relates to the previous work by Nimo Bell into alternative investment opportunities for the Regional Council. Those alternatives, if you like, to the current proposition are within scope. The fourth dimension that Councillor Belford has referred to, which I guess is around dryland farming techniques, ways of using land without either on-farm storage or a major piece of common infrastructure for water storage, is not presently within scope. Certainly the work looking at the implications of PC6 in the absence of a water storage scheme will shine the light on some of those issues, but at this point in time the scope does not include a detailed assessment of alternative farming practice. My advice to you would be that would be a new and significant piece of work, and as I suggested in the note that I circulated to councillors last night and has been tabled today with respect to the public feedback, I have suggested that this might be work that would be initiated after a decision is made on the future of the scheme. However, obviously if councillors are of a mind to expedite that work, it certainly could be included within the scope.
The reason I would be not really keen on that approach is that if we were, for a variety of reasons, to feel like we should not proceed, that I would think we would want to make that decision with some awareness of, well, but there is a plan B here that can accommodate this concern, that concern, the next concern, and that should be tabled as part of the support, if you will, for taking that particular decision. It would be a key element, I would think, of deciding, well, yes, if we do not build this, we will not be returning Central Hawke's Bay to the Stone Age, as some have alleged, because there are, in fact, alternative farming practices that may include on-farm storage, by the way, but on-farm practices that would avoid such a dire outcome. So I think those need to be identified as part of, to me, it's part and parcel of, do we have an option here?
Mr. Chairman, I've got a problem with that, and one of my problems is that it appears to me quite clearly that Councillor Belford is speaking from his predetermined position that the dam project must be stopped.
No, I don't think he is.
Well, I'm sorry, he all through his advertising, right through the election process,
He's saying
he was
it's
very
quite
specific.
difficult to make a decision and put if we don't think there's an option. He wants to know, is there something that is different? I don't think he's saying he's predetermined.
Well, in my mind, it should not have a lot of work devoted to it. It's important that if there is to be a review, and I've even got mixed feelings about that it should be done expeditiously, fairly, and without interference from outside or from councillors, for that matter, and let's get a decision made one way or the other. And if the decision is it shouldn't proceed, then we face the consequences, we deal with the impact of Plan Change 6 without water, and and we move on and then look at the other options. But let's deal with the central issue
Debbie
first
then
and
you
focus
go.
on that.
Thank you, Councillor Debbie.
Thank you. I have a few questions for you, James. My first question, I mean, this whole review, it was an opportunity for a couple of new councillors to come up to speed and one or two of us to get a little bit more information, which I'm wholeheartedly supportive of. But, you know, a cup of tea, and now you're turning it into potentially 7 months. So my first question to you is, how can we shorten this time frame? My next question to you is, how can we shorten the scope of this? Because as I sat in the meeting 2 weeks ago, we were looking at a review, and now it's become a national consultation, and I don't remember authorising that leap from A to Z. We have consulted on this project, and as far as NGOs been in amongst these 26 emails or whatever the final total was, they've had their day in court and they still are, but this is about the people around the table satisfying themselves and in turn being able to build some comms around it positively for the community. But building another whole consultation, how can we shorten that scope? And my next question to you is, when can you get on record? You know, on-farm storage seems to keep coming up. Why don't we just come out and say, instead of going into all of these consultants, look, in effect, it's going to take 3,000 hectares of productive land out of use in Central Hawke's Bay. There's no water that's going to be coming into these dams, these seismic and geotechnical issues, and move on. I mean, you don't need 10,000 here and there to be telling you that. And my final question is, where on earth did this spend, that $150,000, where did the idea come from that was to go back to be capitalised against the project? Because from where I'm sitting, these are concerns that are coming from a very small minority, and I don't believe that this funding deserves to be put back on the project, the water users.
You, Councillor.
Chair,
No, someone else did. Oh, Peter did.
Chair, can I just respond to those first? Look, if we'll end up with too many questions to be able to answer in a.
Try and answer those. We're quite hard, I thought.
So look, in relation to the last issue first, so the cost issues, look, staff have just taken the approach that's been adopted to date, which is that each piece of advice that the council has procured in relation to the scheme that has involved an external cost has been attributed to the overall project cost for the scheme, so capitalised into that financial commitment. It is all part of the council working through its investment, deliberating around that and making a decision. So that's the approach we've taken, but if there is an alternative approach preferred by council, we'd be willing to obviously receive that direction. On the question of consultation, the suggestion had not been for national consultation. The idea was to engage the community on the findings of the review, given that there is a high level of interest in this review, and to communicate the content of it back into the community. So that is the approach, and I appreciate that we haven't had any direction at this point from council that consultation would be required, and that could be a decision that's taken at the conclusion of the review. For planning purposes, however, we have incorporated some time and some cost on the assumption that there would be a desire to undertake some consultation on that. With respect to the comments about on-farm storage and the need for further advice on that, look, while there might be a relatively straightforward picture in the minds of many around that issue, we felt it was important, given it is an issue that is recurring, that we do have some genuine expertise in the area of on-farm agronomy and water storage, and that we actually do a review of the numbers that have already been looked at around that, so specific costs, hectareage of land loss, the availability of rainfall inflows to fill such storage, etc., so that we put some kind of facts in behind that issue. And if I could, Chair, just coming back to the question raised by Councillor Councillor Belford that I did not get the opportunity to respond to. We have got a proposed work stream around the assessment of the impact on irrigation security and resultant farm gate production in the Tuki from PC6 increase in minimum flows in the event that the scheme doesn't proceed. Can I suggest that that work include some commentary and some analysis around the options available to land users to manage ongoing production on their land in the absence of both stored water and increased minimum low flows, and that may get some way to highlighting the alternative approaches for managing through. There is a reality here that the increase in minimum flows at Redbridge of 25% in 2018 are going to come into effect before the scheme is built, regardless of any decisions taken of this council. So we're in the business of needing to work with the community to manage those increased minimum flows, and the council's ability to understand the options available to landowners will be an important part of our mix on that. So more than happy to include that in the scope.
And just thank you, James. My first two questions was around shortening the time frame and shortening the scope, and to reinforce this shortening the time frame, we have a gentleman in the audience here. He's trying to sell his property, and he's got an axe hanging over him that we seem to be just. There's no respect for the locals in my community by dragging this on.
So the timeframe articulated in the paper of a report back at your March meeting or April, with your indulgence, to be honest, is fairly heroic in of itself, given that we're nearly at the start of December and we have the Christmas period in between. So the people involved in doing this work will be working through January, and some of them did have other plans. So this is quite a tight time frame. The only thing we can do to alleviate that burden, if you like, is to take items out of the scope, and we'd be very happy to delete any of these that are seen as unnecessary. But even if we take those out, I think a report back, say a month earlier at your February meeting, will be very challenging. So I don't think we can shave anything off a March report back, but if we do take some items out, that'll give me more confidence we can report back in March rather than April.
One more, Andrew. What if the Supreme Court comes back in the interim of this rather testing cup of tea? What happens then?
So you're talking about what if they come back and don't grant leave to appeal?
No, they do. It's all done and dusted. Potentially.
Yeah, that's unlikely. They take their own time over their cup of tea.
So thank you, Chair. I've got a pretty simple question, James, but just in response to Councillor Hewitt's concerns, the fact is that this is the perfect time to do a review because the whole thing's on hold while this court case is on, and it's highly likely, in my mind, that you will complete the review process and give us really helpful information about whether this should proceed or not by the time the court case is settled one way or the other. So I'm not concerned about the time frames, and if the cup of tea is a 5-month or 6-month cup of tea, so be it. My question. You say somewhere in the paper here that the list of concerns raised by public were in relation to the first 30 odd responses received, but then there was a whole bunch more of them. So just a process question. Having now had the opportunity to look at all of those responses from the public, are you satisfied you've got them all covered in the issues, the 23 issues that have been raised in the latter part of your paper?
Councillor, we have circulated today a revised analysis of this. I finished reading the last of the submissions last night, and it was also emailed to you last evening as well. Having read them all, I am of the view that the overwhelming majority of issues raised have been considered within the existing scope. The most common areas of concern relate to the implications for landowners and the Central Hawke's Bay community of Plan Change 6 in the absence of the scheme. And the second largest area of focus was very much around the economic impacts, and that cuts both ways. So concern about the counterfactual, if you like, economically for Central Hawke's Bay in the absence of a scheme, but then for other submitters concerned about the veracity of the work that's been done to date to estimate those economic benefits. The other areas of significant concern obviously relate to environmental concerns, particularly in terms of managing the nutrient allocations under the under Plan Change 6 in the event the scheme proceeds, and also around flow issues, whether that be inflows into the dam itself or the function of flushing flows. There are one or two issues which had not been considered, which had some repeated interest, one of which is greenhouse gas emissions arising from changed land use as a result of the scheme and from the building of the dam itself, including methane release from the inundation area. That is not something which has been scoped at this point in time, but work could be done on that. It may not change the overall calculus, but it may give a better understanding of those greenhouse gas impacts. That work is technically challenging. For example, you would need to probably take into account the soil carbon accretion that happens as a result of land use change, as much as you would take into account greenhouse gas emissions from ruminant agriculture, etc., and to do a full analysis of the embodied carbon in the infrastructure itself would potentially be quite a significant piece of work. So I just sort of make that caution in relation to that. Dryland farming was raised by several submitters, and we've already touched on how we could build that into the scope of item 14. And I guess the only other thing that I would want to bring to your attention is that we have one submitter certainly suggested that the views of tangata whenua be canvassed, and I am suggesting that we do that through this process, particularly with respect to the tamatea iwi, and we seek their views and bring those back to the table in a formal way as part of this process. But otherwise, I'm satisfied that the substantive issues here are within scope, and we will never in a process like this be able to fully consider more fundamental issues around the nature of our economy, and look, I would note that we had submissions that were asking about some of the more fundamental tenets of the way our society operates in terms of the capitalist economic system and those sorts of things, which I just simply don't think we can accommodate within the scope of this at this point in time.
Mr. Chairman, 26 submissions. I don't underestimate their value. 26 submissions from a population of 150,000 and maybe knock off 30,000 for kids does not indicate particularly strong interest in the project as such, either way. What has been raised is of value, and if it can be dealt with cost effectively and efficiently in the review, that's fine. But crikey, the notion of looking at methane loss through inundation, for goodness sake, where are we going to stop? I mean, this whole process is...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
No, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair. Point of order.
What is the point of order?
Mr. Chair, are we in questions or debate?
I'm just going to let it, such an important issue, I think we allow Councillor Dick to have his views and put over. So I take your point.
I've got to say that I totally disagree with this arbitrary distinction between questions, discussion and debate. And the discussion thing has been missed out in the past, which has not helped our decision making. That's by the way. No, it's not. It's not standing orders.
Neil,
so I'm with Councillor Hewitt. I believe it's got to be compacted down, and where it is a fact that a particular issue has been reported on, reviewed, peer-reviewed, and maybe peer-reviewed again, then there surely should be a very short summary of that with some reference to the original documents if people want to go back that far. So, I mean, the process has to be one where it leads to a sensible outcome and and decisions. But if it's just going to bury us in detail to the extent that we can't see the wood for the trees, then that would be most disappointing. And in any case, if one simply went back and read the Board of Inquiry evidence and results and reports, quite honestly, one could say that you don't even need this review in any case. But I accept that the review is going to happen, so I'm not going to.
Thank you,
I'm
councillor.
not going to tilt against windmills.
Thank you, councillor. This is such an important issue that I am happy to take, because I have some comments and concerns myself, which I will hold, but perhaps I'll do it now. One of the things that I think is really important is a reference group for James and his team to be able to talk to. And from my perspective, I would like to see a reference group from our community, people from our community, and I did circulate some names and got some positive and negative comment on them, but if everybody could think of people that would be appropriate for a reference group, I think that would be much appreciated by James.
What about the 9 of us here?
Yes.
That's what we're elected for.
Well, that's a thought, but I think there's expertise in our community that we should be referring to, people who have particular skills which are not around this table. That would be very helpful. That's just my view. Another point that I would be very unhappy to have Deloitte's review the forecast. It's a personal, I want somebody else to do that from my perspective. And I think item 11, going back to the Nimo Bell, would be a total and absolute waste of time and energy. So those are just 3 points. Sorry? Yeah, get that off the list. And economics, I would want to know who Stuart Ford Agribusiness Group is. I would be very unhappy if we bring in more people from Canterbury to get involved in this project. So those are just my prejudices, and I'm sure everybody else has their prejudices. I'm just wondering, because it could take all day if we all go through it, so if we could just streamline it and as individuals get back to James with our particular thoughts and prejudices. Yes, Tom?
James uses the term fresh eyes in here for part of this, and speaking to your external reference group notion, even if you see the exclusive purpose of this review as shaping the views of 9 voting councillors at the end of the day, I think part of that process has to recognize that some of us who have had concerns about this are not inventing those concerns out of thin air. We have been reaching out ourselves to other people in the community who we regard as equally well-grounded on the issues, as expert in their various fields that relate to this. And it's precisely a concern that many of the objections or reservations that those folks have raised have not been heard in this process and have not been duly reflected in the analysis presented. And so, from my standpoint, it's the issue of who James and his team consult with on this thing. Having a reference group of the sort that you mentioned is really critical to this having a effect on our decision making at the end of the day. So just re-summarizing certain things that some people take for granted are God's truth is not going to cut it. In some of these cases, there are people who, as I say, are equally expert, equally informed to the degree they've been able to get their hands on information. Part of this process, hopefully, will mean that many of these same people will have the benefit of deeper access to the background analysis and so forth that has been done. So if they are to be debunked in their erroneous criticism of this project, there's a basis for doing it, rather than dismissing them as, well, they didn't, they didn't show up at the Board of Inquiry, where, folks who had reservations about this had very limited resources to do so. Anyway, I really want to reinforce that to me, the who aspect is, and in some cases, I think that's just a matter of whoever is working on this on staff recognizes that, well, here are three people, we ought to hear what they have to say about this. And if at the end of 2 hours of hearing their fulminations about this, we can write off their objections, tick the box and write off the objections, but not to ignore them or exclude them in any way from this process at this point. I don't think that's a major lift. I mean, a heavy lift in terms of what kind of involvement or outreach ought to occur as part of this. It's the normal way that someone would wet test an important proposition like this. You'd go to the people who are most critical and try to take them head on. That's what you would normally do to test a several $100 million proposition, and that's not what has happened here. So this process can rectify that usefully for all 9 of us, I think.
Yes, Councillor. Okay.
Well, Mr. Chair, Councillor Scott and I are very concerned about setting aside standing orders, but that's another issue. Mr. Chair, I just given that you've opened it up to comment, I would say that we're now imposing on Mr. Palmer a somewhat almost impossible task of accommodating about 55 people per section in terms of their analysis. I would suggest that to input vast tomes of additional material into the equation does go beyond probably the scope of Mr. Palmer's capacity to actually do that. So I'll just ask that, let Mr. Palmer know that I think his first go at this is an excellent response to the request, 2 weeks ago, to this council's direction. And secondly, it's been carried out with a high degree of fidelity. I'm picking that the same level of adherence to people's views will permeate the review across the board. And I just wonder whether we can place that level of confidence in the team, the whole team is working on this, to come back with a reasonable and cogent response to what we have asked. And I also would comment that we've got, and I think from Councillor Bailey, a bit of a masterstroke in terms of the content of the review in inviting people to make their contributions, and whether it's 23 nominated here, I'm sure it's a hell of a lot more. We have got, and we ought to have done, the task of engaging with those folk in this exercise. So if we're getting that additional comment, whether there's scope enough to incorporate an analysis of what they're requesting in it, I'd be surprised down the whole list of 23. But I think we're getting the sense and flavour to beef up, if that's the term, those common themes that are coming through, not only from the council's perspective, but from the public perspective.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, one more from
Lucky
Lyra.
last.
Lucky last.
You're good to me, Chair.
I know.
Look, I don't have much more to add other than, I take on board Councillor Curtin's views there in regard to who we're going to bring in and who we're going to leave off, and are we going to relitigate, or are we actually going to look at aspects of this that need clarification. And I do agree that some parts of the review could be dropped off example in the engineering about shifting the whole thing downstream. Well, let's not do all that work until that becomes another discussion. I mean, crikey. But look, it's a bit like the wedding list, and there's some guys around the table who had a bit more experience in that than I have. You're never going to get everyone on the right list. So I didn't even have to name anyone.
He's had 3 goes at it.
There you go. But yeah, look, I'm happy to support this. I just have a question though in regard to the cost. I was, we are getting up into the hundreds, and it's sure it can be capitalised, and that is a continuation of a pre-existing theme, if you like, that as we seek more information, it's for the benefit of the scheme, therefore it should be part of the scheme. But are you comfortable that you'll get in on that money, or through you to Mr Palmer, Chair, or can we save some of that money on the way through?
It's probably fair to say that it was a bit of an upper limit in terms of with the current scope, but noting that we're seeking to leverage existing knowledge, both in-house and externally, and existing reports to the greatest extent we can through this process. So we're only commissioning new work where it has been deemed necessary to do so, either because the issues are new or that the level of confidence in the existing work is in such question that it warrants another go-round, if you like. And so that is very much by exception. And we hope that the way we've budgeted this is at the upper limit, and if we can bring this in under 100,000, then that would be great. The more significant impost here is on staff time, and we're looking sort of 500-600 hours worth of internal staff time on this. The impact of that is somewhat mitigated in so much as that spread between our science folk and our planning folk and our economic development people, our finance people, etc. So it is spread across the business. So there's not one single work program that will be totally destabilised by this, but it will mean for particularly people in my group that work in the economic development space, that there'll be other work that they won't be doing that they will have to accommodate here.
Thank you, James. We'll leave the last word to our 10th man.
Off the bench.
Off the bench.
This is where the inf will come. And I'll just say under my breath, I hope you don't send a whole lot of Maoris from Hastings down to Tangata Whenua and tell us what to do. Has there been, am I right in saying there's been considerable work done on farm storage for a 4 or 5 months period? Because that seems to be a reoccurring query in the newspaper.
Mr Mohi, I would suggest that if I characterised it as considerable, there will be some who consider it as either less so or more so. So I don't want to confirm on that because there'll be many views about the adequacy of the work done to date. What I can confirm is that there has been work done on farm storage, and we are proposing it to be our focus here, and we will be bringing back to the table specific estimates of the costs and benefits of that.
Okay, look, thank you, everyone. I want to wrap this up with a recommendation. I also want to say, James, it's a huge amount of work you've put in here, and pretty good first shot, whilst it is a first shot, and everyone's going to have comment on it. And to Mr Mohi, we won't send any Hiratonga Māoris upstream, but can you just please ensure that everything you do upstream affects in a positive way the people downstream? It just hasn't always been completely clear that. Okay, do we have somebody to move the accepting the recommendation? That's all the recommendations, including the request to capitalise, which was a bit of an issue.
I'll move, Mr Chair.
A mover.
Doing that for March?
Oh, inclusive, yeah. Oh, that's right. Sorry. Let's go back there and look at those.
It might be
Look at
easier.
those. We have them printed in front of us.
Yeah, so if Councillor Curtin's happy, there's a couple of other issues that have come up during the discussion that I think are also missing from these recommendations. The first is that these issues aren't yet finalised, and if I understand the conversation correctly, you're now looking for some councillor feedback to finalise these, which you then bring back on the 14th? Is that correct?
So it's not currently in the recommendations to come back on the 14th, but that would be a logical thing to do. I think the point I want to make, just in terms of the timeframes we're working to, is that we will get this work underway on the assumption that most of this is wanted and agreed. We'll do that as of tomorrow, or if not this afternoon. And so we won't wait till the 14th to get that initiated. But on the 14th, I'm happy to bring back a paper to council which closes the deal, if you like, in terms of the final details.
So I think we need a recommendation along those lines. And also, there's been discussion, which you've actually recommended here, about creating if you like, an independent reference group to support and assist the review, and I think we probably need a resolution along those lines as well. So, Chair, with your permission and with Councillor Curtin's permission, what I'd like to do is to adopt the 7 recommendations that are in the paper, add a number 8, which is finalise the issues for review after councillor feedback, and bring them back to council on the 14th of December. Yep, that's fine. Yep, modify number 5. Yep, that's fine. Modify 5. Yep, that's fine.
And where are you going to put the reference group?
Mr. Chairman, who's going to take editorial responsibility for all the stuff that may come in from councillors in terms of councillor feedback? I mean, you just can't keep expanding the scope of the thing all the time.
So, Chairman, what I suggest is that councillors provide that to me by way of email, preferably by, let's say, Wednesday next week, which will allow me time to prepare the paper. I will send you all an email inviting and reminding of that, and I will seek to, for the paper on the 14th, to identify any areas of disagreement or divergence and all those common areas of view among councillors as well, and so you can make a final decision on the 14th if there are anything that is not agreed.
So I'm actually hoping through this process, Councillor Dick, that we'll end up with a more refined review rather than a bigger one.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
But anyway, we'll have a final sign-off on the 14th. So that was, I think then number 8 would become a point of reference group to support and assist with the review.
Why do we want a reference group, apart from 9 councillors who are responsible and accountable?
I thought I already answered that, but I will say it again. The skill set around this table is quite different from the very unique and particular skill sets that are here. Like, for instance, I don't think there's anyone around this table knows how to build on-farm storage, water storage. Maybe Fenton might have a bit of a clue. It rains in Wairau, he doesn't have to store any water. But that in particular is something that I would like to seek counsel from our community. That's just my personal view. So I do strongly support reference group, particular financial skills that are not particularly around this table.
Chair, could you just mandate James to seek external reference should he need it?
I think that
And then
was
it
a
comes
suggestion
back to
that Councillor Balford made, that he picks it up as he's required. We put some names out there, although...
Mr. Chairman, can I suggest that in my email correspondence with councillors over the next week on the content, I also canvass suggested names and/or skill sets for that group, and bring back a suggested list of names and skill sets to the meeting on the 14th. And if there is a long list, there will be a long list, and council can make a decision about shortening that.
That's okay with me.
So you can't be doing this publicly. I mean, we're not coming here at a meeting to assassinate people because they're not independent. We're embarking on a very dangerous process.
Chair, we do appoint...
How dangerous is it to consult our community experts?
No, I'm not talking about consulting the community. I'm talking about plucking out a group of people. I mean, who's going to choose them? we've got 9 elected councillors here, and to go and choose other people, and who's going to say you're independent, you're not, you won't get consensus around this, and to exclude any stakeholders in this discussion is potentially dangerous.
Chair, I don't even think that the people we're talking about need to be independent in the sense of not having a view about the dam. Some might be supportive of it and some might be against it, and I think that's good. James wants to hear some range of opinions. I don't have any problems with that.
I don't either.
As long as the process doesn't get captured.
Could I just make the observation, when we now start asserting we've got a dangerous process, we just had a vote before where instead of allowing everybody who has an interest in having this regional council spend money on something, we've decided ahead of anybody else. So the people who want the playground in Wairoa, who put applications there before and have been turned down, were excluded from that process. Now I say that's a dangerous process, but it's perfectly acceptable. So let's not get too hoity-toity about this. We're clear. If we're prepared to do it for one, you should be prepared to do it for another. I don't agree with it either.
Don't agree with the second one either?
No, I don't agree with it. People go to complain about these things. Well, be consistent. Don't do it the first time and complain the second time.
Okay, I just want to feel on the reference group. The reference group is people from our community who all of us think have particular expertise, and I can't see the harm in it. Everybody has an opportunity to pinpoint particular people who they think will be useful for James to be able to reference with. Do we have a general support for that?
Mr. Chair, if I could comment, I would be very keen to have a strong representation of farmers from Central Hawke's Bay, because on many occasions there have been many comments about what they do and don't think about the dam process. So I'd be encouraging as many farmer representatives to be stepped forward and to have their voice heard in this process along with others. I think that's the whole point, is let's get that range of views on the table. That reference group ought to contain strong representation from those directly fronting up with the money.
I agree. I don't disagree with that at all.
But could I just make another observation? We're getting here to the point of having sort of value judgments arise out of this. For me, this review is to ascertain the facts. What are the facts about the financials? What are the facts about this? What are the facts about that? And having got the facts established, then make a judgment. That's what we're here to try and do with this review. That's what I understood the process was, to make sure the analysis and the underlying facts and assumptions were accurate, on which at the end, when presented to council, we could make a judgment. We're not making a judgment, then going extrapolating the facts and what we think about it. So let's tie-ho here. If we've got people who have got expertise, and there's a reference group come along and they say, these are the facts that you can rely on, these are the assumptions you can reasonably make, we then make a judgment on that. That's what I see this is about. To have value judgments before that is not the right way to do this. This is about pure analysis.
I 100% agree with that. So the people that I nominated are people that will deal in the facts. Does it add up? Is this a good idea? Does this building this dam equate to building dams? I mean, we've asked that question per litre. I just want people who I trust their judgment to say, tick. Now, you may not like that. That's what I personally want and require others. And I just want to add another thing. You say there's 17, 18, 23 people. Let me tell you that we just held an election, and there's a huge part of this community who wants a serious look at this project. Whether you like it or not, that is the fact, and that's what we're going through. So let's not raise that issue again. If you have any ideas on Central Hawke's Bay farmer from Wairoa, if he has talent and intellect and can objectively look at the numbers, then
Trenton.
Then James can make an assessment and whether that kind of talent is the kind of talent that he wants to reference his numbers against. I think we do have general support for a reference group, whether it be from the environment or whether it be from the farming community, or whether it be financial. And we should proceed with that. So if you have some thoughts, tell James who those thoughts are. I'm the only one who's put up any names so far, and Tom has added to those. Oh, and so has Paul. Okay, these. You want to add these to the?
Yes. Yep. So the reference group would be.
It's going to be hard to get across the line.
Would be the reference group would be recommendation 8.
8.
And then the recommendations that have been handed out on the sheet would be 9 and 10. But can you please
Mr. Chairman, I think you should deal with those separately. I mean, there's 1.3. If that's carried, it means that the project is shut down as of now.
Why?
Because desisting from taking any further steps
Any
towards
other
acquiring
means.
the dock land under the Public Works Act or by any other means. That means withdrawing support for the...
You'd have to take out...
Oh, well, by any other compulsory means.
So, Mr. Chairman, the paper, as Peter's amended it, the recommendations originally all relate to the conduct of the review. Can't
Yeah.
we simply get those,
I
approve
think
that,
that's
get
right. I
that
think
off the
Councillor
table?
Dick is right, and then
This-
deal with this
This
separately.
relates to the so-called moratorium, which has
Yeah.
its own issues and debate around it, it seems to me.
Is everyone happy that we do that though? That Councillor Bevan can put these separately, and we take the original recommendations, so the 7 recommendations, but we still allow.
I think it'd be helpful, Chair. I think when you've taken the move and the second of the motion, it incorporated all of these things, and what you are now going to decide as a Chair, and correctly I think, is that you'll take these items separately.
Yeah, just
And
don't want
that'll
an
be your
objection when I
decision,
come to
and
it.
we'll all then say whether we agree or not.
Okay, I just don't want anyone to object. So, okay, will you move on the 7 recommendations, Councillor Dick? Do we have a seconder?
Well, it's actually become 8.
Or 8, the 8, sorry, the 8th.
Yeah,
I second that. Now, we've had a lot of discussion on that, so I'm just going to go straight to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendations? Oh, you want to speak? I thought we'd already exhausted it. Okay, then therefore, pause, Mr. Chair. Debbie, we've got a mover and a seconder. Do you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. This review should be a relatively easy process. You know, the majority of the issues have already been comprehensively reviewed, and in terms of a cup of tea, I think it's becoming incredibly arduous. I'm very firm that it shouldn't be an opportunity to relitigate Ruataniwha. Delaying tactics are just playing into the field, and I think it's an incredibly unfortunate set of circumstances that we're drawing on. I have huge concerns about the reference group, and James, I hope you'll use your impartiality to keep names out of the public. The other thing that I think is absent is the comms spend, and if we're going to get any value out of this, then I think it needs to be told with a really good comms story, and I'd like to see that tied in as part of what you come back with on the 14th. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dick, I didn't give you an opportunity to speak. Do you want to hold while Councillor Bailey speaks, and then I'll come back to you? Okay, Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. As I pointed out in my letter to the editor, where I asked for feedback, I think the 3 things that really I really want to see in the review is it's independent, that we get feedback from the citizens, and that when it's eventually presented to the public, that it's in a manner which they can understand. And I think they're really important issues. I also like to thank James for the work he's put in so far, and I'm especially appreciative of the agreed purpose of the review, which is to ensure the costs and benefits of the scheme, as well as the risks and opportunities with decisions to proceed, abandon or shelve the scheme, are clearly identified and articulated in order to facilitate informed decision making. I think that's exactly what we're after. That's exactly what I'm after. So I'm really pleased to see that in there. Thank you.
Councillor Dick, do you wish to speak?
Oh, look, I'm not really going to say anything very much other than I support this, but I support it with reservation, but also with hope that out of it will come an objective and unbiased analysis that enables this council to settle this matter after 6-7 years and 3 years of solid contention in the last term, which was just not fun at all, and get on with doing our best job for people of Hawke's Bay.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to emphasise that this is not about whether water storage is a good idea or not. This is about whether Ruataniwha works and is a good idea for us to proceed with or not. And there is a risk of this getting bigger than Ben-Hur, and we do need to constrain the review without unduly limiting it, and that's going to be quite a task for you to manage, James, and I'm aware of that, and you know, hopefully that's what we'll end up with. But to end up, and it's a good time for it to happen because of the court case actually putting things on hold anyway. So the timing is quite propitious, really. So I think it's what we're going to end up with is a bunch of information all assembled in one place that hopefully not just we can appreciate, but the public can appreciate, which will give us all confidence about where and how to proceed past the review. So I think this is a really good process. I think the public have demanded this process, and I think that even if it takes 4 or 5 months, I think it's a really good process for us to embark upon, and I look forward to the outcomes.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take the recommendations 1 to 8. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. Now, the next we'll take a little bit of time. I think the one that we're going to move straight to yours, Peter. So I'm just going to